Welcome back, everyone, for the second part of this morning's meeting. We're now on item 6 on the agenda, which is commissioning arrangements for holiday activities and food HAF programme. This item is for pre-decision scrutiny prior to a decision by the Executive on the 4th of May. And I'd like to welcome Charlotte Gray, Head of Service Children's Strategic Commissioning, who are presenting this report. And welcome also to Sarah Gregory, Commissioning Manager, Children's Strategic Commissioning, and Nikki Myers, Interim Head of Service, Early Years and Childcare Support, who are in attendance to help answer questions. So without delay, it's over to you, Charlotte.
Thank you, Chairman. So since 2018, the government have funded the Holiday Activities and Food Programme, or HAF as it's referred to, as a pilot to support children in receipt of benefits-related free school meals during the school holidays in terms of providing them with enriching activities and hot meals during that time. Following the pilot programme, last year, the government rolled out the HAF programme and funding for it to all upper-tier local authorities. The council received a grant of £2.5 million last year from the government, and at the time in Lincolnshire we had about 22,500 children who would have been eligible to access that provision. So the holiday clubs have to follow national guidance, and they provide, as I've said, healthy meals and enriching activities amongst a range of other things for children. The clubs have to run at 4 days at Easter, 4 days at Christmas, and 16 days over the summer school holiday period. During the pilot year, which we had to stand up very quickly, we had 5,000 children engage. And we used over £1 million of the funding. Feedback in terms of the children that accessed through the pilot was very, very positive from families and children themselves. We know that there were some challenges, though, with delivery. Obviously, during that time, there were various COVID restrictions that came in and out over those various periods of time. We also had less schools than we would have liked who were able to deliver the HAF programme directly, mainly because schools and their staff felt really burnt out from a lot of the pressures throughout the pandemic and felt that their staff needed a break. So we relied a lot on other organisations to come in and deliver those services. We also recognised during the pilot that we really needed to expand into secondary age pupils and also make sure that our HAF provision was really inclusive for children with special educational needs and disabilities, and make sure that they also had the same opportunities as their peers to engage. So taking that forward now, the government has agreed funding for the next 3 years for the HAF programme. Guidance is largely the same in terms of what's expected to be delivered. And this year, the council will receive £2.6 million in funding for the programme, and that increases down to an increase in eligible children. And really now we're looking at how we're taking the lessons learned from the pilot and mainstreaming this over the next 3 years and how we want to commission this going forward. So we've had the Easter programme that's just been delivered, we've seen a bigger increase in terms of providers who are delivering. And again, we've had some really, really positive feedback, and we've had more places that have been offered to children with special educational needs and disabilities. So that's really positive. Going forward, though, clearly we need to grow the HAF programme. We want to make sure as many eligible children and young people that can access the provision do have a place available. So we're going to continue to offer the provision over a mix of venues. So that will be on and off school sites, early year settings, district council, leisure provision. But we also will work and continue to work with voluntary community sector and private providers of out of school activities as well to grow the offer. We want to focus on face-to-face delivery. It's really important that children get the activities face-to-face, that the activities cover a broad range of activities, that hot and healthy school meals are provided to children, and nutritional education. We also want to encourage providers who currently offer activities but charge to broaden their scope. So we will allow providers to offer some chargeable places as well. And equally, we're allowed to offer spend up to 15% of the funding for children who may not be eligible because they receive free school meals, but actually may be open to children's services and have other vulnerabilities and think that they would really benefit from accessing the provision during school holidays. So that's a really positive thing. We are recommending then, as with the pilot, that we continue to directly award grants to our strategic partners, so schools, early years settings and district councils. They will still have to bid via an expression of interest to deliver the HAF programme, but we will be looking to award them grants for up to 3 years, so we reduce the burden on them administratively of having to keep applying for each individual HAF period, and they will need to meet HAF criteria in order to be granted. And then more broadly, because we will have a reliance on a larger group of providers and looking to increase that, HAF falls under the light touch regime of the Public Contract Regulations 2015, but it's proposed that we continue to offer the funding through a grants programme, but we want to make sure that it's fair and competitive and that we provide a lot of opportunity for providers to bid, but equally that we've got criteria that providers must meet. So we're proposing to run it through a process called an open select list, which we use in commissioning regularly, and it means that providers have to meet minimum criteria. It's a relatively simple and straightforward process, and then we'll be able to run mini competitions. So as far as possible, we'll bring new providers in and provide grants over a 3-year period, giving them sustainability to increase staffing and the number of provisions that they can offer. But where we've got gaps in provision across the county, we'll run mini competitions periodically and be able to keep bringing new providers on through the course of 3 years. And we will continue to monitor the quality of provision as well, and make sure that we're getting out and visiting settings and that the activities are of the right standard that we would want for our children and young people. So we have considered other commissioning approaches which have been set out in the report, such as a framework or a dynamic purchasing system, but they tend to be more restrictive in terms of their flexibility, and so we feel and we recommend that an open select list approach is used for the commissioning of the HAF programme going forward. So the recommendations have been set out in the paper in front of you. And we're asking executive, when they make their decision, to approve the model that's been described in the paper going forward for delivery, that they approve the establishment of an open select list as the commissioning methodology through which we'll engage with third-party providers, that will continue to directly award grants to our strategic partners to provide HAF provision, and that the delegation of authority to the Executive Director of Children's Services and the Executive Counsellor for Children's Services to take all decisions necessary in relation to conducting the OSL and awarding grants going forward. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Charlotte. I'd like to invite members of the committee to comment on the report. Councillor Cleaver.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a number of points to make on this. The strongest one, I think, the thing I feel most strongly about is that this service should be available to anyone. I don't like the idea, particularly of segregating off those children who are entitled to free school meals. So I would like the council to strongly prioritise those bids that come in from providers, would-be providers, who are prepared to undertake to make the service available to everybody, albeit obviously that it would be a cost to those who are not entitled to free school meals. And I feel very strongly about that. Another issue that comes up is the question of venues. I wonder how much children would benefit from actually being in a venue which isn't their normal school, which is more of a challenging and a different and a refreshing new experience for them during the school holidays, rather than being stuck in the same classroom in the same building that they spend the other 36 odd weeks of the year in. I notice in my own division that the local rugby club is the premises for one of the providers. I was delighted to see that. So in my division, there's a choice between going to the school or going to the rugby club with a private provider, obviously doing a lot of sport as well as hot meals, which seems like a very good example. I'd love to know how well that went. That went this Easter, actually. Feedback on that. Again, a thing that affects me, particularly in my division. I assume that the service is available to those people who live in Lincolnshire, not those who attend schools in Lincolnshire. So if you attend a school in Lincolnshire, if you attend a school in Rutland, but you actually live in Lincolnshire, you can still benefit from this. And really just a question about monitoring and feedback of the success and the quality of the service provided, how that's going to work, please. But I would like to emphasise very strongly that we should prioritise those providers who are going to offer something to everybody and not segregate off the children who are entitled to free school meals. Thank you.
Yeah, am I all right to respond? Thank you. In terms of, I think what we've tried to do is make the sort of the programme that's going to be here now for the next 3 years far more available to other children and young people. We were really, obviously, the guidance is very clear that we have to focus on children who have access to benefits related free school meals, but we recognise that that might mean for other providers who offer chargeable services that it might restrict their ability to become involved in delivering half, and actually we want their experience. So we're being much more flexible. We may receive some challenge in terms of prioritising and saying you as a priority will be awarded a grant if you offer it for all children and young people, because we have to stick to some quite strict DFE guidance in terms of how we deliver it. However, part of the market engagement that we're undertaking, because what we need to do is go and speak, we're speaking to a lot of providers and trying to grow this, is speaking to providers who haven't necessarily come forward because they're delivering chargeable sessions, but going to them directly and saying, this is how it could work. You could still deliver your sessions, but offer a number of free places to children who would be eligible on this, and trying to grow it that way. So while I don't think we'd be able to put it as a requirement in the grant scheme that you would be a priority if you could deliver it, we certainly, through our market approaching, are very much encouraging a growth from those established providers already. So I hope that provides some assurance. We've got some guidance that we do have to stick to, not unfortunately, because it's there for a good reason. In terms of venues, absolutely, we want a diverse range. So there are, we get the benefit in schools of them not charging us for all of the overheads and things that we might get from some of the private venues. And we've got a sort of limit, really, in terms of how much we can fund for each place in order to make it viable. So schools are a good venue, and actually a lot of families like to go to their local school because they know and trust it. But we also recognise that we want to enrich children's experiences, and you'll be pleased to know that even if they host it in a school, they can do trips out. So a lot of our HAF provision have been taking children to the castle, for example, or various different places, so they can operate some trips out even if they mainly host in a school. And then in terms of the living in Lincolnshire, can you clarify, Sarah or Nikki, because I don't want to say the wrong thing.
So in terms of the grant funding that's given to the local authorities, it is very much based on the number of eligible free school meal children and young people we have in our Lincolnshire schools. So the priority does have to be to those pupils attending Lincolnshire schools.
Sorry, I was going to do the monitoring. So we have to provide central monitoring back to the Department for Education. Every local authority does. So there's some monitoring information that's a requirement for us to collect. But also we've got our own monitoring process, so that's been established through the pilot programme and is being refined and expanded as we scale up the number of providers. So we're going out and doing spot check visits, and we're looking at the quality of food, the quality of the activities that I've undertaken. We're looking at safeguarding policies and procedures, making sure that any food allergies, any cultural needs are being met as well. So there's a whole raft of checks that we have in place, and I would actually invite anybody here to come out and see the provision. I know we've been out, haven't we, over Easter to undertake some monitoring visit, and it's really worth going into your local community and seeing the local HAF provision and what's going on. So if you would like to, we'd be more than happy when we're going out and monitoring for you to accompany us. And then I don't know if that's answered on the monitoring. Is that all right? I mean,
just to say, whatever assessment you do of this Easter's, it would be lovely if you could share that with the committee.
Yes,
Thank you.
we can provide a feedback on that, and then obviously it will be a continual programme of monitoring thereafter.
Councillor Cleaver, I just wanted to offer you some reassurances as well. With that money that we receive in, we have got 15% discretionary funding. So we are looking at that with the steering group and looking at what other children that we would want to prioritise to go to those clubs. So taking that point on board, just to clarify.
Thanks very much, Nikki. Councillor Parker, I think you're next.
Yeah, I had three questions to start with. The first one was around free school meals, which we've dealt with. In any scheme, the second point I wanted to ask about is, in any scheme, there's always a hard-to-reach group. You know, we never get a hit of 100%. And I'm just interested in what will happen to those, in relation to those children whose families don't take up the initiative. I don't think there'll be many, but it is about having a spread across the whole county. And Lincolnshire is a big county, and I don't know how we are going to be able to reach out to all points of that, the number of schools we've got. And then finally, the question of the engagement of schools is of importance, because I'm a governor at one school, and there's two more in the division that I represent, and most of the teachers, for example, including the head teacher, are very keen on schemes like this, but also want a break after, want a 6-week break after fulfilling their obligation and duties as teachers. And I just wondered how we're going to tackle that particular issue.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of, if I take the hard to reach communities, so because we've got a clear track in terms of where provision is being offered over in the county, we've got some communities where, you know, we've got the ability to target and say we know that you know, that we've got a cohort of children potentially that we really want to get some provision really close to where they live, and then because of having an open select list approach and being able to, every time we run a half programme, target where we've got certain areas and bring in new providers in that area, we'll be able to fluidly look at where we need to increase provision. And we've already done that. And I think the thing is, on the ground, if we've got children who teachers think would really benefit from engaging in half, but perhaps aren't, that we're using the dialogue and communication with schools for the head teachers to contact those families and encourage them and sell the benefits of that child attending. So it's using that relationship. So even though the school might not be the provider in that area, it's about the school then, you know, as the trusted individuals working with that family saying, come along. And I think that sort of leads into the second point around schools as a provider. Although we've not got as many schools who are actually using their staff to deliver it, we've got an awful lot of schools who are using their premises and allowing, say, for example, their normal sports provider who comes in and delivers every week to use their premises. Often you might get the head teacher or a school member of staff on site on the day that they're delivering, but they are fundamentally involved still, even if they're not the provider. You might have the sports provider, for example, as the person that we've got the grant with, but they are working hand in hand with the school to make sure that the right children are attending. So it is something that we are going to be working directly on to make sure we've got more schools on board, but equally working with these providers to make sure that they are covering more schools as they, you know, hopefully have got security through 3 years worth of funding to grow their staff in that time to cover it. Did you want to add anything?
Just looking at our hard-to-reach groups, some of those are open to our statutory services or on plan through TAC arrangements. So one thing we've done leading up to the Easter programme is really work with our social care teams and really promoted this offer through there and they've helped us to get those people onto the programmes, those children and young people. So that's been really positive as well, really working with our own social care teams to get that offer really firmly embedded with that cohort of our children.
That's one more question, and that's relating to the way that we as a local authority, like every authority, operates, which is usually in terms to the starting point is desired outcomes. Okay, and that can be translated into targets. Okay, what would we say would be our target for the hit rate for young children and young people picking up and benefiting from this scheme?
So there isn't, I was just checking whether there was a specific target that had been set through the DFE in terms of the percentage that they'd want us to reach of those children who are eligible. There isn't a specific target, but at the what we're sort of looking at from a funding perspective is we've got a unit cost in terms of how much viably we need to spend per child in order to cover the cost of the activity. The reality is with the £2.6 million, we're unlikely to be able to reach 100% of our nearly 30,000 children and young people who would be eligible with that funding. But at the moment, you know, as Councillor Bradwell asked me a similar question, and you know, I would expect us to be working with well over 10,000 to 15,000 at least of that cohort. I mean, we have to remember as well, particularly for Easter and Christmas, where it's quite a shorter break. A lot of families actively, they like HAF, they think it's great, but they are actively choosing to spend time with their children as well and not put them into them. So there is a balance between not everybody will want to take up the offer regardless of how enriching it might be. I think the summer programmes will invariably prove to be the most popular, and that's when we'll see our highest numbers.
And just to add to that, we've completed a delivery plan that's submitted each year to the DFE, and then we report back to them on the numbers that we've been able to get into the programme. So it's around the figures that Charlotte has said.
Thank you. Councillor Tyrrell, I believe you have a question.
I think all my questions have been asked and answered. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Councillor Blackburn.
Yeah, I would just like to ask, if there are children that are eligible but they're not in an area where it's being delivered, does your funding go as far as covering transport for them, because some parents might not be able to afford to get them there?
We did have some gaps prior to the Easter deliveries. We had some gaps along the east coast and Spalding, but with the Easter delivery and new providers coming on board, we don't have any particular gaps across the county now. But we do have an element of that can be used for transport as well. So we would look at that if it wasn't within walking distance or travelling distance that they could get hold of. Yes. You can.
And just to emphasise that as well, what Nikki was just saying, so during the pilot year, we did have some instances regarding that where they were being, because of the East Coast area, that we were being delivered in a certain area, but support around transport was provided so that those children could access the provision.
Thanks so much. Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Chairman. I like it. I think it's the right approach that you've gone for, and it's good to see that flexibility. I would be keen to see the third sector groups as a more of a priority of getting the contracts actually over the district councils or anything, because district councils do many things, and they do many things very well, but actually these individual groups specialise in these kind of services. So I would very much prefer to see those as the first choice preference. I am, of course, very conscious about the funding being spread out evenly across the district, across the county, and not just about those who do apply in first. So obviously, of course, South Holland for me is of course a priority. And one of my focuses was going to be about the funding, because if something's delivered in William Stookley and Holbeach, then Holbeach and Marks people, for example, will find it hard to get in. So I'm glad to hear about the transport element. The other thing is, for the pilot, we got £2.5 million. And it says on page 46 we spent basically £1 million of that funding. Did it basically just go back? And that was it. How did we compare to other councils? You know, were they giving back as much of that back, or could we maybe have done better? I don't know.
Yeah, so I think to take the point on the VCS, absolutely, they are fundamental in scaling this up. And so we already engage through the Children and Young People's Voluntary Sector Forum with a significant range of providers, and we're absolutely targeting the VCS through the Voluntary Sector Forum in terms of making sure that they have the opportunity, and we're trying to make sure that the application process is really simple as well and not overly bureaucratic, and offering longer term funding so that people can employ staff to deliver this. So that's one of the things that we're doing in terms of really encouraging VCS to engage in this more, although we have had a number of providers from that sector already. The funding, obviously, and the targeting of children and young people, it will be based in terms of the population of the children and young people. So obviously we'll have some children in some areas where we've got more who would be eligible, and we will be targeting the funding based on that. So we won't be just saying, oh, well, great, we've got loads of providers in Lincoln, great bids, you can have them. It will be very much about having that spread of provision based on where children need it. And that might fluctuate over 3 years, so which is why we need a flexible approach to commissioning it. And then finally, yes, unfortunately, it was spend it or lose it. However, what I would say is we were asked at very short notice to stand up this provision, and I'm sure you'll appreciate, amongst all of the other things that were busily happening in 2021, that was within existing staff's job, so they were doing it on top of business as usual activity. Other areas were the same and underspent their grant and had to pass it back. Obviously, there were some areas that had been running half since 2018, so they were in a really great position to deliver. We're in a better position now. We've got the pilot there, and so we will obviously be doing everything we can to make sure that our grant is fully spent. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Councillor Matthews, I believe you have a question.
I do, and I'll apologise for squeaking. I'm in long COVID, I think. I'm clear, but I can't speak properly. On page 46, I think there's some very telling information. It says that in the pilot in 2021, there were 22,500 Lincolnshire children aged 5 to 16 who would have been eligible. Clearly, there would have been. But we've just heard figures that there will be nearly 30,000 people, young people eligible in 2022. And then we heard a sort of a finger in the air. We hope it will be well over 10,000, maybe as high as 15,000. And yet, at the bottom of page 46, it says across the 3 HAF programmes delivered in 2021, Easter, summer and Christmas, 5,500 pupils were engaged. That's less than a quarter of the eligible pupils. And that cost £1.5 million for those 5,500 pupils. So I'm ever so sorry to say that the arithmetician in me and the strategist in me is saying we're not going about this the right way. And I'd colour that with my knowledge of what happened on the East Coast and the gaps that you've talked about, and the fact that we have highly vulnerable children, we have a sparse school population with a lot of busing going on, we have a fantastic migrant population in the summer where there are a huge number of people coming, there are a huge number of people drifting, we're working in the seasonal economy. And I just wonder why we're not doing a direct provision where we use all of the money to engage people to go and make provision where we want it, and then target all of the people, because you used a phrase, we make sure the right children are attending. Well, the right children are the 22,500 or the nearly 30,000 in this coming year. And I think that we're basically funding somebody else to do a summer holiday programme. And I speak as someone who has run summer holiday programmes for years and years and years. And I don't think this is the way to go about it. I'm ever so sorry. That whole fundamental expenditure is not right. That's not to say what is not going to be delivered is bad. It's just that I think we've got, well, let's hope it works. And I think we should have a more direct control over this. I'm ever so sorry that the fact that in the pilot, less than 25% of eligible children attended means we've not. So my second question is, what are we doing to find out what happened to the 75% and how we're going to overcome that for this year's expenditure? Because I just think this is serious finger in the air stuff. I don't think it's valid.
Am I right to come in? Sorry. No, I do take your point, and I think the reflection on the pilot is, because the speed at which we had to stand that up, that was, in terms of the unit costs that were being paid and the number of spaces that were available, that was one of the main issues. We really quickly had to get this in. We didn't have, although there were 5,000 spaces, we would have wanted and we would have happily bought more, but we didn't have the providers offering it. So it wasn't and we were working hard to get the numbers up, and equally some of the unit costs that we were having to pay for additional activities as well over the Christmas period, because we knew that we had the grant. We had that grant available, and I suppose what I'm saying is, the pilot, we were very much having to work in a fast and less planned way because of the nature that the grant arrived to us and we needed to mobilise quickly. Whereas this programme is very much about needing to refine the unit cost in terms of what we're offering, making sure it's absolutely value for money. The reality is we're unlikely to be able to deliver to every single child who is eligible, but we know that not every single child will take it up. But I suppose I don't think I'm quite understanding in terms of the methodology in saying that we won't be able to, that it's the wrong approach. I don't think I've quite understood what you mean in terms of what would be the right approach, sorry.
I think Heather wishes to come in.
Yeah.
Sorry, I couldn't get my microphone on. So just to clarify, I think, Councillor Matthews, what you're saying is your experience on the East Coast was that the providers didn't come forward, therefore the provision wasn't there, therefore we couldn't spend the money and we couldn't get those young people to activities. Where they did come forward, they were dispersed and transport was an issue. And I think that what you're suggesting is that if we kept more control and we directly delivered the provision, we could put it exactly where we wanted, we wouldn't be reliant on providers.
Very good, Heather, as you always are. I think I'm asking for a hybrid model. I think we should have some direct control to target those that aren't engaging. And I think my concern is that, yes, of course, you'll get volunteers who will come forward, who will fund their football programmes they were going to run anyway, and they just say, well, we'll charge the county council for those 5 kids that are on free school meals, but they'd have run their summer football programme, at the city, and that's all really good. So I'm not criticising the provision, I'm just asking, could we have considered directly commissioning some, freelance entrepreneurs, teachers, Lincolnshire County Council, and then placed it where the need is, where there isn't an offer, in addition to the volunteer scheme that you're running?
So
proactive rather than reactive.
So just to provide some assurance over the Easter programme, that's the approach we took in terms of when we got all the bids in. What we looked at was where our areas of priority were, and looked at ensuring that they were mapped first and then the wider across Lincolnshire. But because we did get some bids that were offering provision where we knew we already had it covered, so we didn't accept those, or we only accepted for what they were suggesting for where we didn't have it covered. So we have certainly been able to do much more of that mapping and in advance before the Easter programme this time. And also we are using also some of our LCC colleagues as well to help to deliver that. So for example, our music service has helped to support some of the delivery, and we've also had some support from our youth team as well. So it is a very much more mixed model this time around, and that has been implemented as part of the Easter programme.
May I just ask for, not today, but please could somebody tell me the provision that's been made between Sotheby and Skegness on the East Coast as part of this programme and the continuing programme, because I imagine that we've got quite a high proportion of those eligible children, and I'm not getting the sense within the community that offer is there. So but not today now. We've gone on long enough. Thank you. Is that all right, Chair?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to come back, Charlotte? No.
I can just, yeah, absolutely, we can share that with Councillor Matthews, and also, I think probably helpful if we extend the offer of a visit as well to look at some of the activities that are going on.
Thanks. Oh,
Can you include maybe thought too? Other thing I want to ask question, you often to go out to visit, to taste the school dinner. I am interested. Okay.
Thanks, Councillor Sear. Councillor Parker.
Brief.
Yes, if you could.
Could we extend that point that was made by Councillor Matthews to every councillor?
Yeah, I think actually Councillor Bradwell did write out previously to all councillors. We did a briefing for her that gave a link to where all the activity was happening. We will do that again, absolutely.
Thanks very much. I'm very conscious of time, so I think we'll have to call an end to questions. The actions that are required of us are we've been invited to consider the attached report and to determine whether the committee supports the recommendations to the executive as set out in the report, and secondly, to agree any additional comments to be passed on to the executive in relation to this item, and I know Tracy has taken some notes. The 5 recommendations to the executive are set out on pages 43 and 44 of the agenda pack. As I've said, Tracy's made some notes of our comments. I therefore propose we support the recommendations. Can I please have a seconder? Councillor Smith, thank you very much. We now vote on the item. You're voting on whether you support the recommendations to the executive and agree to those additional comments to the executive. All those in favour, please show. Unanimous. Thank you very much, and thanks to Charlotte, Nikki and Sarah for your contribution this morning. That is supported. We now move on to item 7 on the agenda, which is the proposal to expand capacity at Fourfield Church of England School, Sutterton, which is a final decision. This item is for pre-decision scrutiny prior to a decision by the Executive Councillor for Children's Services, Community Safety and Procurement on the 29th of this month. And I'd like to welcome Matthew Clayton, Admissions and Education Provision Manager, who will be presenting this report. So it's over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Chairman. And I feel very lonely. All my colleagues have just left me. As a bit of background, Sutton Fourfield Church of England School is a village school just off the A16 between Boston and Spalding. Serves quite a large rural area, including 4 main villages, which is reflected in the Fourfields name of the school. It currently has a PAN, or published admission number, of 20, which is their official intake number. It was expanded in 2017 by a single classroom, and that took them to 5 full-size classrooms from 4, and it enabled them to over-offer a bulge intake up to 30 in their current year 4, so that was their 2017 intake. In 2018, they took another bulge year, that's their current year 3, and in 2021 again to enable local children to access a school place at their closest village school. And I think that's an important part to make. It is about making local provision for the local children. It's not so more people can attend from further afield to attend a school. It is a local demand. The PAN capacity would actually be 140 if they took to PAN in every year group, but they couldn't have 158 on roll. It's anticipated that a further overoffer may be necessary for 2024, if not before, based on the current birth data that we have. As a result of a number of these bulge intakes, they are currently having to use a small former resource space as a 6th classroom, which is less than short of resource space overall. The space they currently have, it's in Appendix D, which is page 97 in your report. It shows the current layout of the school and the small classroom of just under 35 square metres, labelled as room 36. That smaller classroom has been used for a year 6 class of 20 pupils. It works okay as long as the class size is kept small across the full structure of the school. A class of 30 would not fit in that space. With the class structure necessary from 2023, if they stayed across 6 classes, then no class would be small enough for the current 6th classroom without some very large mixed year groups and some mixing across the school to make that work and fit. There's obviously there a clear case for an extra full-size classroom to be built to increase the PAN permanently to at least 25 if they were continuing to use the undersized classroom for what would then become the 7th classroom. However, they would still be without the resource space a school of this size would ideally have and would still need to mix year groups. So whilst it would be cost effective, it would still leave the school with a shortage of intervention space, and therefore it's been proposed in this report that the infrastructure is put in place for 7 full-size classrooms so they can take back that space as a resource space and have the infrastructure they need for one form entry school, and that would obviously allow single year group classes across the school. That could be achieved by building 2 new classrooms and reverting that classroom space back that I mentioned. The early indicative layout is shown on page 99 in Appendix D. More detail would come later at the planning and application stage. The proposed expansion is by more than 30 places overall and 25%, so therefore it triggers a statutory process in accordance with DfE legislation. In that process, that started on the 11th of November 2021 with pre-publication consultation, then through to a statutory notice being published on the 2nd of February this year, followed by a representation period, and now we're at the final stage, which is that final decision by the LA as the decision maker on whether or not to progress with an implementation date of September 23 for a new capacity of 210, which obviously would require the building work to take place. The details of the full process are in the report. It includes the responses from the consultation and the representation period. Summaries included in Appendix A. It shows the majority of respondents support the proposal. Any concerns raised have been addressed in the report. Any of those concerns in relation to the likes of planning, parking, traffic and access will be considered a part in the planning application consultation process, which would come later if this proposal proceeds. It's quite evident, and you may have picked up from the responses, that as with any school in a residential area, parking at pick-up and drop-off time is an issue and a concern for local residents, and this may be something that Highways wish to consider as part of the planning application and would look to address through that process. So if the recommendation is to expand the school, is supported as per the paper, it would progress through the planning process accordingly, and a later paper would come back regarding the capital appraisal process for this scheme, which would offer more detail. At this stage, I'd welcome any questions or comments on the paper and the proposal and the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Do we have any questions for Matt? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. It's not a question, but it's more of a statement, and as Matt's already alluded, notwithstanding some of the concerns from some local residents, the increase in the published admission number will actually be a big benefit, I think, so I'm quite happy to move the paper as it stands, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Councillor Matthews.
Great plan. I've got no issues, and it looks like the population is increasing, but have we forward planned enough? Bearing in mind the work we're doing in Holbeach and the fact that the world is creeping up the A16 towards us, and it has over the time I've been here, and it's starting to all look very clean and tidy on that road. There's a lot of house building going on. Might there just be another a look at the design to see that in future you could fill a space easily and cheaply in 10 years' time, rather than sticking something on the end? It is just that question. I have got no issues whatsoever with what's going on. I just think the numbers are likely to grow rather than shrink.
Yeah, just on that point, it's a very good point. We do, when planning the design of schools, is try and future-proof them as much as possible. So if there is a need in the future to expand them further, that we can anticipate where that might be. And a good example of that is when in 2017-18 we did the other classroom extension. We considered what might happen in the future if we needed to do what we're doing now. So we do try and do that as much as possible. Obviously, it's limited by the site size and access and things like that, so it may get to a point where at some point in the future another school is required, but at this stage, plan as best as possible based on what we know at this point in time.
Thanks very much, Matt. If we have no further questions or comments, then I'll just recap on the actions required of us. The committee is invited to consider the attached report and to determine whether the committee supports the recommendation to the Executive Councillor as set out in the report, and to agree on any additional comments to be passed on to the Executive Councillor in relation to this item. The recommendation to the Executive Council is set out on page 58 of the agenda pack. The comments from the committee's discussion on this report have been recorded by Tracy and will be passed on to Councillor Mrs Bradwell. I therefore propose that we support the recommendation. Can I please have a seconder? Councillor Smith, thank you very much. We'll now vote on the item. You're voting, of course, on whether you support the recommendation to the Executive Councillor and agree to provide the additional comments to the Executive Councillor. All those in favour, please show.
That's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you very much. It's unanimous. Thank you. And thanks, Matt, again. And we'll move on to the next item. Thank you very much. Item 8 is the Children and Young People Scrutiny Work Programme. The item sets out our work programme for 2022. And it's over to you, Tracy.
Thank you, Chairman. I have no amendments to the work programme, so it's as published as in the agenda pack. Just to highlight that the last meeting, the committee requested further information on educational attainment relating to SEND, EAL, boys versus girls, and correlations between deprivation and attainment. So a report on educational attainment in Lincolnshire schools has been added to the agenda for 22nd of July, along with the overview of the education white paper that was mentioned by the chairman earlier, and the education investment areas report. This provides an education theme for most of the July agenda, which enable the committee to delve into this area in more detail. The July agenda also has a report in relation to a decision for a new children's residential home in Louth. This relates to the previous reports the committee has considered in November on the residential estate expansion programme and the new Lincoln Children's Home. The decision will be taken by the leader between the 27th of July and the 5th of August. And that concludes my update. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks very much, Tracy. I'd like to invite members of the committee to speak on the report. Do we have any speakers? Councillor Matthews.
Thank you very much. I'd like this committee to receive a report on the HAF programme effectiveness in 2022 based on my concerns and anxieties, but the very good answers that we received. But please, before we start planning for 2023, could we receive a report to this committee on what's happened this year? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Matthews. That seems a perfectly reasonable request. I think we can accede to that. Yes, that's noted. Any further comments? No? Well, the actions required of us in this case are to review and agree the work programme as set out in the report, to highlight for discussion any additional scrutiny activity which could be considered for inclusion in the work programme, and I think we've done that. So I therefore propose that the work programme is agreed. Can you please raise your hand if you agree?
That's agreed, Chairman.
Thank you very much. That is agreed. We now move on to item 9, which is consideration of exempt information. Item 10 on the agenda contains exempt information, and we will now need to vote on whether we go into private session. I therefore propose the following motion: that under section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act 1972, the public and press be excluded from the meeting for the following item of business on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Smith, thank you very much. We'll now vote on this motion. You're voting whether you support the motion to exclude the press and public for the remainder of the meeting. All those in favour, please show.
That's unanimous, Chairman.
That's agreed. We'll now pause momentarily while we wait for confirmation from Tom that the public link has been terminated.